All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing on dissecting the various races in the Player's Handbook by taking a look at the Halfling. Yes, the other kind of really big race when people think of fantasy races are you have dwarves, you have elves, and you have hobbits or halflings. Now, the reason they are called halflings, little bit of history, is when Gary Gygax was making this, they actually took a ton of inspiration from Lord of the Rings. And in there, halflings are called hobbits. However, hobbit is a trademarked name. So they had to change it to halflings, which is not to trademarked. And that's where they came from. Halflings themselves are kind of well known as far as fantasy races are concerned because Lord of the Rings is as big as it is now due to the movies and the fact that it's a brilliantly written book series. And halflings, or in that case, hobbits, play a vital role in 4 of the 5 officially published books. So yeah. When D&D people think of halflings, they think of halfling rogues, or halfling thieves. There is a huge history of halflings being kind of burglar-esque characters, and it continues in 5th edition. But there's so much more you can do with halflings, including one of either the most ingenious or the most evil characters I have ever seen created, and I will talk about it closer to the end. But anyway, let's dive into the actual race itself. So as a quick refresher on how races work, every race is going to have a few things in common. They're all going to give you an ability score increase. Most races are going to have a sub-race. So half of your ability score increase will come from your base race, and then the other half will come when you choose your sub-race. In addition, they're going to have a section about age, alignment, size, and speed. And then some races will also have night vision included there. And then at the very end, they will always have the languages. So those are, every single race has those. And then the things that make each race unique and the things that are going to make the actual mechanics of playing a halfling versus a dwarf or an elf different are going to be the kind of featured racial traits and abilities. And so that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time. So let's look at the halfling. First things first, there are subraces of halflings in the PHB. There are more once you go beyond the PHB. Right now, we're just worrying about the PHB, and so. In the PHB, you have the Lightfoot halflings and the Stout halflings. We will cover both of them, but let's dive in specifically to just generic. All halflings have this. First thing is the ability score increase, which for halflings is you get your dexterity increased by 2. Remember when I talked about halfling rogues or halfling thieves or burglars being a thing? Well, this is why. Halflings have an inherent bonus to their dexterity. It makes them exceptional rogues. There are other things that also add to why they make such good rogues that we'll talk about a little later. But for the most part, if you want to be a halfling rogue, like, it is a really, really good fit. And you're going to feel very much at home doing that. However, any dex-based class can have a lot of fun with this. If you want to be a halfling ranger, you can have a lot of fun with a short bow and doing cool stuff that way. If you want to be a halfling fighter and be a dex-based fighter versus a strength-based fighter, you can totally do that and get a lot of benefit out of it. Most classes are going to benefit from a higher dexterity score because it relates directly to your armor class for everything other than heavy armor, and it relates to your dexterity saving throws, which is the most common saving throw you will make in 5th edition. So even if you're not choosing a class where dexterity is the primary stat or one of the primary stats, it's always going to be useful for you. So don't feel limited by going, well, I have to be a dex-based character because they get a +2 to their dexterity. No, be a wizard that can actually take a punch. You know, I mean, do something interesting. What can be really fun is making a melee wizard or a melee sorcerer and using dexterity for your attack rolls with things like the Shadow Blade or something like that. You know, I mean, you can really get some interesting creations. Next up, age, alignment, size, speed. Age, halflings reach adulthood at the age of 20. So technically slightly longer than humans, where humans generally are at adulthood between like 16 and 18. Halflings do it at about age 20, and they generally live into the middle of their second century. So somewhere around 150-ish years old. So they're slightly longer lived than humans, who tend to reach their peak unless they have some sort of magical aid in their aging process. Or their end, not their peak, but their end, anywhere between 80 and 120, a little bit closer to like the 100-year-old range. So alignment, we're not going to deal with because it's always been just a guideline, and they're moving away from alignment being connected to race anyways, so ignore it. Size, this is another one of the unique things. We talked about the gnome previously being small. Well, the halfling is small as well. And I figured out what it was about small characters and weapons. It's not two-handed weapons, it's heavy weapons. If a weapon has the heavy property, that means a small character has disadvantage in all your attack rolls with that weapon. It's not that they can't use it, they just have disadvantage in all their attack rolls. Which means a small character using something like Great Weapon Fighter, which requires a heavy weapon, is probably not going to be something that you do, because you would be... Great Weapon Fighter, the big thing about it is you can take a -5 to your attack roll to get a +10 to your damage roll. It's really, really effective. However, if you're already subtracting 5 and then now you have to roll with a disadvantage, you're just not going to use it unless you create a very specific build for that. And Great Weapon Fighter only works with weapons with the heavy property. So, yeah. So that's the thing with small. But as we're going to find out a little bit later, there are some really, really beneficial things about the halfling size specifically, depending on how you build them. And then speed, base walking speed is to 25 feet. Again, all the shorter races, they have that to 25 feet. Again, if you go something like, I forgot to mention this, I don't know why. If you're a halfling monk, which is adorable, by the way, but actually works really well because monks are dex and wisdom based, so you already have your dexterity increased. There is a subclass with a wisdom increase, or a subrace with a wisdom increase as well. So halfling monks are actually really, really good, especially since they don't need weapons. You can do lots of really, really cool things with the hypermobility built into the monk class, even missing that 5 feet of speed. So yeah. So those are the kind of general things. And now we get to the specialized halfling traits. And the first one is something that has existed since halflings were a thing in D&D, I believe. And DMs hate it, players love it. It's called the Lucky. There is a feat that sounds very, very similar to it that was inspired by it, but it's not lucky. Lucky is when you roll a 1 on the d20 for an attack roll, ability check, or a saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. Halflings get to re-roll once. It means that getting a critical failure as a halfling requires a special kind of bad luck. The kind of bad luck that plagues me. And it's really, really useful. It is borderline broken. But because you only have a 5% chance of ever rolling a 1, it doesn't come up a ton. But literally every time it comes up, it is a joyous occasion for everyone. The lucky trait for halflings is one of the things that factored into the most devious class build I have ever seen. So at the end of this, I'll tell you guys about that class build. But there's no way to be tactical about lucky. There's no right or wrong way to use it. It's literally every time you roll a 1, you get to re-roll it, and you have to use this as a second roll. You don't get to choose when to re-roll it. There's not limited uses of it. It is just useful. It does mean, however, you can be a little more risky, especially if you do go that rogue route. Rogues eventually get the ability to make anything other than a nat 1 count as a 10, or that might be bards. Anyway, I think both of them get something similar to that eventually. And with lucky, that effectively means you're almost never failing these rolls that you can just count as to tens. And it's really, really good. So when you're building your character, you can take into account the idea that you're going to be rolling significantly less nat 1s than anyone else at the table. So you can take magic items that have really bad effects on the nat 1s. You can take chances where a lot of other characters won't, because you can't critical, or you're extremely less likely to critical fail. And it's just fun to have the DM watch you roll the 1, and the DM like, ha ha ha, I win. And then you go, lucky, and then roll it again and get a nat 20, and just ruin the DM's day. There was, but back in the early days of the Adventurers League, there was talk about lucky just being broken as hell. Because encounter design and things like that just hadn't evolved enough to deal with lucky. And I don't think there were ever any legitimate talks about it, but there were conversations that I had as a local coordinator and as just a player and an organizer and the things, of just banning the lucky traits. Like, you still be halflings, you just couldn't have lucky. And it never went any there because it's not as broken as it sounds. But anyway, let's continue. The second specialized halfling trait is called Brave. You have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. I've talked about frightened before. Frightened can be a very, very tactical thing to use. because it gives whatever creature is frightened, as long as whatever they're frightened of is in their line of sight, they have disadvantage on all ability checks and attack rolls. So it can be a really, really great way for playing with the action economy. If your enemy always has to roll at disadvantage, they're going to miss their attacks and miss the things that you want them to do more and more often. The same thing can be true about the enemy using fear on you. Being able to have saving throws against being advantage on saving throws against being frightened can be very, very useful. Now, as you get higher levels, frightened becomes less and less of a thing, because you start having things like paladins, which are immune to being frightened, and will have an aura that make you either have advantage on frightened checks or just flat out immunity to it. And a lot of spells to prevent you from getting frightened. But at low levels, this is really useful, especially since a lot of abilities that frighten will have a caveat of if a character makes the save on this, they're immune to this ability for the next hour, the next 24 hours. This is something like that. So you really only need one save to be immune from it, and this gives you a much better chance of making it. So yeah, nothing too complicated, but still very useful. And then finally, you have Halfling Nimbleness, which is where that small size starts getting really interesting. Halfling Nimbleness is you can move through the space of any creature that is a size larger than yours. So because you are small, any medium or larger creature, you can move through their space. Now, allies, you can generally move through their space. It just counts as difficult terrain, I believe. But enemies, you can't. So a really effective way for enemies to deal with larger parties, especially larger parties that have a lot of melee fighters in them, is to bottleneck the group and put someone in the way that the team can't get past. So that enemies can just lob shots at whoever's in front, and the person in front can't get any further. With Halfling Nimbleness, you can move right through their square. And it doesn't say you can move through the space of a creature that's a size larger than yours, and it's done it, and it's kind of this difficult terrain. No, you just get to move through other characters' squares. So if you combine that with a hyper-mobile class, like a monk, you become very, very dangerous, because now you can go anywhere and take the shortest distance there. If you're a rogue and you can use your bonus action to disengage, you can literally run through characters, enemies' squares, and they can't do anything about it. They can't get opportunity attacks or anything against you, and then you can go and attack the people that really need to be attacked, or find a better place to hide, or there's so many different things you can do with it. So, yeah. With a halfling, and this is something that, again, in the years that I've been running games and having halflings, I don't see a ton using halfling nimbleness, and I think it's a super undervalued thing. Everyone, when they roll a halfling, they only think about lucky, which again is a nice ability. Halfling nimbleness does so much more. So yeah, that's the base halfling traits, and then languages, they speak common and halfling. So yeah, you're kind of standard to the things. Now, like I said before, there are two subclasses of halfling. They are the Lightfoot and the Stout halfling. There are more than that. They have Ghostwise and Lotsuden, and then a couple house marks that are specifically designed for halflings. But we're not going through all of them in this. This is just the PHP stuff. So let's start with the Lightfoot halfling. First things first, Lightfoot halfling, your charisma score increases by 1. Charisma, for class-wise, charisma is really useful for paladins, because it's their casting ability. Sorcerers and warlocks, again, because casting. A Lightfoot Halfling paladin is not a crazy thing. Most people, when they play paladins, they go strength charisma, so they can wear heavy armor, and they can smite and do things like that. But there's nothing in it that paladins have to be strength based fighters. You can go medium or light armor. You use dexterity and have a very kind of dexterous paladin that can still smite and do all the really awesome paladin types of stuff. Just a little bit different. And the Lightfoot Halfling is perfect for that. So if you want to get like the absolute use out of both your abilities to score improvements, a Lightfoot Halfling Paladin works really well. Sorcerers can make some pretty interesting characters if you give them a dex score. Again, making melee sorcerers is not a very difficult thing. So if you want to go a little bit more, toe to toe with creatures, you can do that. Otherwise, just having a higher armor class as a sorcerer is always useful. Like there just isn't a downside to having better dex saves and better armor class. Same thing is true about warlocks. And if you go Pact of the Blade warlocks, again, the dexterity is going to help by giving you a higher armor class. And I want to remember here, because I'm blanking on whether or not your pact weapon counts as finesse. Well, theoretically, you can create any kind for your pact of the blade weapon. You can create any kind of weapon, or you can turn a magic weapon into your pact weapon. So really, if you want to be a dex-based warlock, you can just go pact of the blade and create finesse-based weapons and things like that, and do really, really cool stuff. So lots of cool things involving the Lightfoot Halfling. The second thing you can you get as a Lightfoot Halfling is called Naturally Stealthy. You can attempt to hide even when you are obscured only by a creature that is at least one size larger than you. And this is where a lot of DMs hate halflings, specifically Lightfoot halflings, because of what I call peekaboo rogues. So, to understand how this works, rogues have an ability called Cunning Action. It lets them use their bonus action to do one of the three things: dash, disengage, or hide. The way most people think of hiding is you are invisible and you automatically get advantage to your attack rolls. If a rogue has advantage on their attack roll, they get their sneak attack damage, whether or not an ally is near the target. So this is what the peekaboo rogue would do. They would have a melee fighter get up one-on-one with the enemy. They would get right behind the melee fighter, so they're literally 10 feet away from the enemy. They would go, well, I have a creature that is at least one size larger than me in between me. I am going to use my bonus action to hide, and that gives me advantage, and then I'm going to make my attack with my crossbow or my short bow. And now I get sneak attack, and that means I have advantage, and so I'm going to crit on this and all this stuff. And it's really, really stupid, to be perfectly honest, because there are so many different ways rogues get their sneak attack bonus, and they don't need advantage on every single attack roll. It's stupid. That's not how hiding works, by the way, in the rules specifically, and that's not how attacking from stealth works. Specifically, it says if you attack an enemy that is not expecting you to attack them, you get advantage on the attack roll. However, if they watch you walk behind the person right in front of them, they're going to expect you to attack, especially if you've done it for 3 turns in a row. 2-year-olds have object permanence, meaning when they stop seeing something, they don't assume it doesn't exist. Before 2 years old, if a baby can't see something, it thinks it just doesn't exist. It is popped out of existence. That's why peekaboo is such a fun game for them, because you are literally disappearing and reappearing in front of their faces. Their minds don't understand object permanence. Once you hit 2 years old, that's when most people will get object permanence, and you keep it. Object permanence is not something that goes away with age or malady or anything like that. We just understand that objects continue to exist just because we can't. They continue to exist despite the fact that we can't see them. So yeah, that's my little rant on Lightfoot Halflings. I don't let them do that in my games, and I will rules lawyer the hell out of them going, no, play your character creatively. Do something fun, do something interesting. You don't need advantage on every single attack roll. This is stupid. Anyway, so that's the Lightfoot Halfling, the bane of green DMs. The second halfling is the stout halfling. And I was wrong, actually, because I thought the Lightfoot was wisdom, but it's charisma. So in the PHP, there isn't a wisdom bonus to 2 halflings, but you can still make a really cool halfling monk, even without a +1 to wisdom. So it's just a stout halfling. First thing you get is their constitution score increases by 1. We have talked about this many, many times before. Constitution is good for everyone. It is just a useful stat. Especially since if you're using the standard array, generally the 15 and the 14 are going to go into your 2 most useful stats. It's just generally how it goes. Your third stat is a 13. And I know a lot of players, myself included, that their third best stat is almost always going to be Constitution because hit points are nice. With this, you can put that 13 in there and boost it to a 14 and get that extra hit point every single level. So that's always this is useful. As I've said before, Constitution is only really used by the Barbarian class. However, you can create kind of a unique Barbarian with the fact that you have your dexterity increase. Now, Barbarians really have to be a strength-based class because the additional damage they get when they rage is only on strength-based melee attacks. So you do have to be strong. However, having the bonus to the dexterity will mean that your armor class for the unarmored defense for the barbarian is Dex and Constitution. So having a slightly higher Dex means you can have a higher you can have a higher armor class, so you don't get hit nearly as much. And because halflings are small, they generally can't use heavy weapons, which is what most barbarians will use, like a great axe or a maul or something. But barbarians still get their unarmored defense bonus if they're wielding a shield. So building a stout halfling shield barbarian can be really interesting. Especially if you use like a hand axe or even a battle axe, because again, the two-handed and the versatile thing is something from a previous edition. It's not in 5th edition. So you could have a really, really tough to hit with a high armor class barbarian. It still does some pretty killer stuff. So yeah. The other thing you get as a stout halfling is called Stout Resilience. You have advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance against poison damage. We talked about it before. Low to mid-level D&D, poison is really bad. As you get to higher and higher levels, there are a lot of the things that will give you immunity to poison or resistance to poison. Really just make poison not as big a deal. but it's still really useful to have saving advantage on saving throws against poison, because a lot of times if you fail a saving throw against poison, you either A, get the poison condition, which is disadvantage on and everything, or B, you take crap tons of damage as the poison triggers and hurts you, or other bad things. Drow poison knocks you unconscious instantly. There are some poisons that paralyze and things like that. So making your poison saves very, very useful. And taking half damage from poison is also very useful. Again, there isn't a whole lot of strategy that can go into using stout resilience, because it's just, if you're fighting poison things, they aren't as dangerous to you. Yeah. So that is the halfling. So for final thoughts. Halflings are cool. Like I said, most people, when they think of halflings, they only think of rogues. Specifically, the Peekaboo Rogue. Lightfoot Halfling Rogue is the bane of my existence. Not because I don't think it's a cool class or a viable class. I think it's very, very good. It's just min-maxers and munchkins used to use it all the time until DMs got smart and started going, no, that's not how the rules will work. Come up with a more creative use of your character. But other than that, they're fine. Lucky is super fun. Halfling nimbleness is not used anywhere near as much as it should be, and halfling monks are cool with halfling nimbleness. Now, I did tell you I was going to tell you about the most evil character ever. I think I know I've mentioned this on D&D Deep Dive before, but a buddy of mine who is also a local coordinator for the D&D Adventures League, he still works very closely with them, and he was a regular at the convention that I ran. We both used to go to the same convention circuit, so we would see each other literally at every convention in Wisconsin. Yeah, because we were involved with so many conventions, we knew all the DMs, or we knew most of the DMs. I ran all the D&D for one of the conventions, or organized it all. So I knew all the DMs. Like, I had their email addresses and everything, because I would tell them when I needed more DMs. Every so often, a new DM would show up on the scene for whatever reason. I mean, it's good that new people are DMing. Or someone would come from out of town and want to run games and things like that, which is perfectly fine. That's how I was able to afford most of my conventions, is if you ran enough games, you would get a free ticket. And if you ran even more games, a lot of times you could negotiate a hotel room as well. So you could go to a convention without paying for a hotel, without paying for tickets, and then carpool up with someone, and you barely have to pay for gas. It was a super cheap way to go to conventions. But yeah, every so often we'd have a DM at a convention that we didn't run, because bad DMs I didn't allow bad DMs at my conventions. But we'd come up against a bad DM who he was a jerk, or he would change things so that he could kill players and stuff like that. It happened, not often, not nearly as much as it happened in Pathfinder Society, but there'd just be jerks. And so my buddy would pull out the DM killer, which was a halfling. I can't remember which flavor. I think it was a Lightfoot halfling. I might be wrong. But it was a halfling wizard. It was a divination wizard with the lucky feet. So what it was divination wizards at the beginning of the day, they roll 2d20s, and they get to save those d20s. And anytime during the game, they can just go, DM, my character foresaw this roll, and it's this. And they can interject whatever they rolled, which means it doesn't matter what they roll, because you get to choose which roll you replace it with. Rolling a nat 1 is just as useful as rolling a 17, because being able to have an enemy go, oh, he's casting the disintegrate spell. Oh, don't worry, I already saw him cast this spell, and he got a nat 1 on it. Or the enemy needs to make a save and go, oh, don't worry, I already saw this roll. He got a nat 1 on this save, so he fails. Now, the only limitation is you have to do it before you find out what the roll was. Simply because it'd be a little bit cheating to be able to see, oh, he rolled well. I didn't want him to do that. But that's the only real limitation. The lucky feat lets you use luck points to re-roll dice, either your dice or dice that are rolled against you. And then lucky, you get to re-roll the lucky halfling trait. You get to re-roll any one on a d20. Meaning, in any given day, he could replace or re-roll 5 rolls every day, every adventuring day, and any nat 1 he got to re-roll. So any DM that would try to stack the deck or make it super hard so the players couldn't win would have a really hard time stacking the deck or even fudging rolls against this character, because he could just change the rolls whenever he wanted, and he was a very good player. Any DM that has enough experience can totally become a min-maxer or a munchkin, because we deal with them all the time. And he min-maxed the hell out of this character. I think there was some multi-classing in there to add a couple other things that let him make rerolls and that. Like, it was just nuts. So yeah, most devious character I've ever seen. And like I said, he generally would only bring it out for people, for DMs that we didn't like, that needed to be taken down a peg, or DMs that we really liked and we just wanted to give them a hard time. I believe he used it at one of my tables. And it was a blast, because I don't take things personally. But yeah, so halfling traits, lots of fun. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and turn notifications on so you never miss any of my stuff in the comments down below. What is your most What is your most broken halfling nimblest thing you can think of? What's the just weirdest thing you could think of something you could do with halfling nimblest, running through enemies' squares and doing weird stuff to them? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.